Here is the truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Success is not something you chase. It is something you become. And you become it not through one big decision, not through one giant leap, not through the right opportunity showing up at the right time. You become it through what you do quietly, daily, when no one is watching, when you are tired, when you feel like nothing is working. The person you are in those small, invisible moments is the person who either builds a great life or watches one pass by. Habits are not the road to success. Habits are the construction of the person who eventually becomes successful. And until you understand that difference, you will keep waiting for results before you have done the work of becoming. Let me ask you something. Think about the last time you wanted to change your life. Maybe it was a new year. Maybe it was after a painful moment. Maybe it was one of those late nights when you looked at your life and felt something was deeply wrong. You made a decision. You felt it in your chest. You told yourself this time it would be different. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you moved. You felt alive. You felt like change was coming. And then it faded. Not because you were lazy. Not because you were weak. But because you were trying to produce results before you had built the person capable of sustaining them. You were running before you had learned to walk consistently. You were planting seeds and then digging them up every 3 days to check if they had grown. That is not a character flaw. That is simply a misunderstanding of how transformation actually works. Think about a young man named Daniel, 26 years old. Smart, talented, deeply frustrated. He had tried everything. He had started businesses that collapsed. He had begun fitness routines that lasted 2 weeks. He had read books and taken courses and listened to every motivational speech he could find. And every time he came alive with inspiration, he would throw himself completely into a new direction, exhaust himself in the first 2 weeks, and then quietly return to the same version of himself he had always been. He could not understand why his life was not changing. He thought the problem was that he had not found the right idea yet. He thought the problem was motivation. He thought the problem was discipline. But the real problem was that he was focusing entirely on outcomes while ignoring the only thing that actually produces outcomes. His daily behavior. His habits. The small, repeated actions that were either building a new identity or reinforcing the old one. Every time he chased a result without first building the habit that produces the result, he was constructing a house from the roof down. And things built from the roof down always collapse. You see, the world has taught us to think backwards. We are taught to set goals. We are taught to visualize outcomes. We are taught to chase results. And none of that is wrong. But it is incomplete. Because the person who achieves a goal is not the person who wanted the goal most. It is the person who built the daily behavior that made the goal inevitable. Success is not a destination you arrive at. It is the natural overflow of a disciplined life. And a disciplined life is not built in one dramatic moment. It is built in 1,000 quiet ones. Have you ever noticed how the people who seem to have it all together are not necessarily smarter than you? They are not necessarily more talented. They have not been given easier circumstances. What they have is a set of deeply embedded daily behaviors that are slowly, invisibly, constructing the life they live. They are not chasing success. They have simply become the kind of person success naturally flows toward. That is not luck. That is not magic. That is the power of repeated action compounded over time. Now understand this. A habit is not just a behavior. A habit is an identity statement. Every time you act with discipline, even in a small way, you are telling yourself something about who you are. Every morning you get up when you said you would, you are reinforcing the belief that you are someone who keeps promises to yourself. Every time you sit down and do the work when you do not feel like it, you are building evidence that you are the kind of person who does hard things. And over time that evidence accumulates into an unshakable sense of self. That is what confidence really is. Not a feeling that arrives before the action. It is the residue of repeated action. It is the inner knowing that comes from watching yourself show up over and over again. Think about a woman named Maria, 43 years old, mother of two. She had always wanted to write. She had a story inside her that had lived there for years, waiting. But she had told herself for so long that she did not have time. That she would do it when the kids were older. When work slowed down. When the house was cleaner. When life settled. And life never settled. Life rarely does. One day, not because of a dramatic event but because of a quiet sadness she could no longer ignore, she decided to wake up 20 minutes earlier than everyone else in her house. Just 20 minutes. She did not tell anyone. She did not announce a new chapter. She simply sat with her coffee in the dark and wrote. Some mornings she wrote a page. Some mornings she wrote 3 sentences. But she showed up. Every morning she showed up. 6 months later she had the first draft of the book she had been carrying inside her for 12 years. Not because her circumstances had changed. Not because time had suddenly appeared. But because she had built a habit so small it was almost invisible, and that habit had slowly become who she was. She had become a writer. Not the day her book was finished. Not the day it was published. She became a writer the morning she sat down in the dark and chose the habit over the excuse. That is where transformation lives. Not in the dramatic moments. In the quiet ones. Most people never realize that the version of themselves they are waiting to become is already available to them. Right now. Today. Not after they lose the weight. Not after they make the money. Not after they fix the relationship or move to a new city or find the right circumstances. The person they are waiting to become is available through one thing only. The daily decision to act like that person before they feel like that person. Habits are how you borrow identity from the future. You act as if you are already the person you want to become, and eventually the acting and the being merge into one thing. Ask yourself something honestly. What are you doing every day? Not what are you planning. Not what are you thinking about. Not what do you want. What are you actually doing? What repeated actions are filling your hours? Because those actions, whether you realize it or not, are building something. Either they are building the life you want or they are building the life you are afraid of becoming permanent. There is no neutral ground. Every day you are either moving toward who you want to be or drifting away from it. And the terrifying thing is that drifting feels comfortable. It feels normal. It feels like rest. But drift, sustained over years, becomes a cage. There was a man named Robert. A good man. A hard-working man. He spent 30 years at a job he did not love because the paycheck was reliable. He told himself he would pursue what he really wanted eventually. He told himself this year. Then next year. He had habits, but they were the habits of survival, not growth. He had built a life that was stable but hollow. And the day he retired and finally had the time, he sat in his living room and realized he no longer knew what he wanted. The decades of small, unconscious choices, of defaulting to comfort, of postponing the habits that truly reflected his deeper self, had slowly eroded his sense of who he was beneath the routine. He had built discipline around the wrong things. He had been consistent, but consistent in the direction of safety rather than growth. Robert's story is not a tragedy about time running out. It is a lesson about awareness. About looking at your habits before years pass and asking honestly, are these the behaviors of the person I want to become, or are these the behaviors of the person I settled into becoming? Here is something that most people do not want to hear. The reason you are not living the life you want is not because you lack talent. It is not because you lack opportunity. It is not because you were dealt a bad hand. It is because somewhere, in your daily life, there is a gap between what you believe about yourself and what you are actually doing with your time and energy. You believe you are serious about your goals. But your habits reveal something different. And that gap, that space between intention and behavior, is where most people live for years without ever examining it. Self-deception is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. We are extraordinarily skilled at convincing ourselves that we are doing more than we are. We mistake thinking about something for doing it. We mistake planning for executing. We mistake the desire to change for the act of changing. And the gap stays open. The life stays the same. And every year the distance between who we are and who we could have become grows wider, and we feel it as a kind of quiet grief we carry but rarely speak about. Think about this. You know exactly what you need to do. You have known for a while. You do not need more information. You do not need another strategy. You know that the gym at 6 in the morning would change your body. You know that reading for 30 minutes a day would change your mind. You know that saving a portion of what you earn each month would change your finances. You know that spending less time on your phone and more time in genuine presence would change your relationships. You already know. The question is never what to do. The question is why you are not doing it. And the answer is almost always the same. Because you are waiting to feel ready. Because you are waiting for motivation to arrive like a wave that carries you forward without effort. And that kind of motivation, the kind that sustains itself without the foundation of habit, does not exist. Motivation follows action. It does not precede it. You feel like doing the work after you begin, not before. And the only way to begin is to decide that the habit comes first, and the feeling comes later. There is a young woman I want you to think about. Her name is Sophia. She was 22 when she decided she wanted to be healthy. Not thin. Healthy. She had tried diets before. She had had weeks of intense exercise followed by weeks of nothing. But this time something was different. This time she did not set a goal. She did not give herself a deadline. Instead, she made one decision. Every day, no matter what, she would take a 30-minute walk. That was it. No dramatic transformation plan. Just a walk. And she kept that promise to herself through busy days and tired days and days when it rained and days when she felt defeated by everything else in her life. For 3 months the scale barely moved. She did not look different. But something deeper was shifting. She had become someone who keeps commitments to herself. She had become someone who shows up for herself even when it is inconvenient. And from that foundation, from that new identity, everything else slowly followed. Not because the walk burned enough calories to transform her body, but because the habit of the walk built the version of Sophia who then made better food choices, who then started sleeping earlier, who then gradually added strength training, who then 2 years later was living in a body and a life she did not recognize from the outside but felt completely natural from the inside. She had not chased transformation. She had built it. One quiet walk at a time. Now understand this deeply. There is a fundamental difference between the person who is trying to achieve a goal and the person who has built the habit that makes the goal a natural result. The person chasing the goal is focused on the destination. They are measuring every day against whether they have arrived yet. And when the arrival takes longer than expected, which it always does, they get discouraged. They feel like they are failing. They lose momentum. But the person who has built the habit is focused on the process. They are not measuring success by whether they have arrived. They are measuring success by whether they showed up today. And because showing up every day is completely within their control, they always have something to feel successful about. This is not a small shift in thinking. It is a complete rewiring of the relationship between action and identity. And it changes everything. Ask yourself this. What would your life look like in 5 years if you built just 3 powerful habits and kept them without interruption? Not perfectly. Not without struggle. But consistently. What would your finances look like? What would your body feel like? What would your mind be capable of? What relationships would you have built? What skills would you have developed? 5 years of consistent daily behavior in the right direction is not a minor improvement in your life. It is the complete reconstruction of your life. But most people never get to experience that because they stop before the compound effect becomes visible. They plant the seed and then abandon the soil. The philosopher Aristotle said something that has lived through 24 centuries because it is simply true. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. And I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not as a quote you have heard before, but as a truth about your own life. What are you repeatedly doing? Who are you becoming through repetition? Because whether you are conscious of it or not, repetition is always at work. The only question is whether it is working for you or against you. Think about a man named James. A businessman. 40 years old. He had built a company that by every external measure was successful. But he was exhausted. Not physically exhausted. Soul exhausted. He had built his entire life around outcomes and none of it around process. He had optimized for results and neglected the daily experience of being alive. He had created the financial success he had chased but had not built the habits of rest, of presence, of genuine connection, of inner quiet that would have allowed him to actually enjoy what he built. He had become very good at achieving goals and very poor at living. One evening, sitting in a hotel room in a city he could not quite remember why he was in, he called an old mentor of his. A man who had built a quieter, less visible, but deeply rich life. And the mentor said something that rearranged everything for James. He said, the goal was never the goal. The goal was always who you had to become in order to get there. If you built the wrong habits to achieve the right result, you got the result but lost yourself. Now you have to go back and build the habits you should have built first. Not for the success. For the person. That hit James somewhere deep. Because he realized that in his relentless chase of outcomes he had accidentally built habits of urgency, of disconnection, of treating people as instruments rather than as ends in themselves, of never being fully present anywhere. And those habits had quietly constructed a version of him he did not like. The lesson was not that success had been wrong. The lesson was that the habits matter more than the destination, because the habits shape the person, and the person lives with the results long after the achievement is celebrated and forgotten. Here's where this becomes deeply personal for you. I want you to think about the version of yourself you most want to be. Not your net worth. Not your body measurements. Not your job title. The person. Who is that person in terms of how they move through the world? How do they begin their mornings? How do they treat the people they love? How do they respond when things are hard? How do they spend their quiet hours? What do they do when no one is watching? Because that person, the one you can see clearly in your mind right now, that person is not waiting somewhere in the future to be found. That person is built. Daily. Through the accumulation of small, repeated decisions about how to use your time, your energy, and your attention. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. You do not have to wait until you feel like that person to start living like that person. That is the great reversal. You have been waiting to become before you act. But becoming happens through acting. Identity is not the starting point of behavior. Identity is the result of behavior sustained over time. You become the person through the doing, not before it. And the moment you internalize that, the entire equation of your life shifts. You stop waiting for readiness and start building through action. There was a father who came to a point in his life where he looked at his relationship with his teenage son and felt the distance between them like a physical weight. He had been busy for years. He had provided materially but had not been present emotionally. His son had grown into a young man the father barely knew. And the father wanted to change it. He thought about a grand gesture. A trip. A conversation that would fix everything. But his mentor told him this. There is no conversation powerful enough to undo years of absent behavior. But there is something that can rebuild it. A habit. One small habit. Show up consistently. Not dramatically. Consistently. So the father started a habit. Every evening before dinner he would sit with his son for 15 minutes, no phone, no agenda, just present. Some evenings his son barely talked. Some evenings the silence was uncomfortable. The father kept showing up. And slowly, over months, the distance began to close. Not because of the 15 minutes themselves, but because 15 minutes of consistent presence communicated something that no conversation could. It said, "You matter to me every day." Not just when it is convenient. Every day. Relationships, like success, are built through habits. Through the repeated, daily choice to show up. And the father who committed to that habit did not just rebuild a relationship with his son. He rebuilt himself. He became the father he had always wanted to be. Not through one moment of realization, but through 1,000 moments of choosing to be present. This is what habits do. They do not just produce external results. They rebuild you from the inside. Every time you act with integrity, you become more integral. Every time you act with patience, you become more patient. Every time you choose the long-term good over the short-term comfort, you strengthen the muscle of delayed gratification. And that muscle, once strong, changes everything. Because every important thing in life, health, wealth, love, wisdom, requires the ability to sacrifice what you want now for what you need later. And that ability is not a personality trait you are born with. It is a capacity you build. Through habit. Through practice. Through showing up when it would be easier not to. Most people spend years hoping their circumstances will change. They wait for the job that will motivate them. The relationship that will complete them. The opportunity that will finally give them permission to become serious about their lives. And circumstances do change sometimes. But here's what I have come to understand about human nature. A person who has not built the habit of discipline will not become disciplined when they get the opportunity. A person who has not built the habit of presence will not become present when they find the relationship. A person who has not built the habit of consistent effort will not sustain that effort when the business finally shows promise. Because the opportunity does not create the character. The habit creates the character. And the character is what determines what happens when the opportunity arrives. Most people are not failing because they lack opportunity. They are failing because they have not yet become the person who can do justice to the opportunity. I want you to think about this in terms of your own life. What opportunity has come and gone? What chance showed up, maybe even multiple times, and did not produce the result you hoped for? And what does that tell you? Not about the opportunity. About you. About the habits you had or did not have at that moment. Not as a criticism. As a diagnosis. Because a diagnosis, unlike a judgment, points toward a solution. The solution is always the same. Build the person first. Build the habits that construct the character. And then watch how differently the same opportunities feel when you encounter them as a different version of yourself. There is a kind of quiet power that comes to people who have built strong habits. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. But you can feel it in them. They have a groundedness that is not about arrogance. It is about a deep inner knowing that they have shown up for themselves consistently enough that they trust themselves. They do not need external validation to feel worthy of moving forward. They have built their own evidence. And that internal foundation, built brick by brick through daily habit, is more valuable than any amount of talent or luck. Because talent without habit is a seed that never gets planted. And luck without the inner capacity to sustain it is a wave you cannot stay on. But habit. Consistent, humble, daily habit. That is what builds the person who can hold the life they have worked toward and actually live it well. Ask yourself right now, in this moment, what one habit, if you built it and kept it for the next 2 years, would change the trajectory of your life more than anything else? Just one. You already know what it is. You have probably known for a while. You have been thinking about it, planning it, intending to start it, and postponing it because the time never feels quite right and the motivation never feels quite strong enough. And here's the thing. The time will never feel perfectly right. The motivation will never arrive fully formed before you begin. The only way through is to decide. Not with excitement. Not with a surge of inspiration. With a quiet, firm decision that you are going to build this habit because you understand, finally and completely, that the habit is not the road to the goal. The habit is the construction of the person who will eventually live the life you want. And that person is worth building. You are worth building. Now we come to the part of this conversation where I want to speak to you about something that goes deeper than habit, deeper than discipline. Because underneath all of this, underneath the strategies and the psychology and the stories, there is a question that every person who has ever tried to change their life eventually faces. And the question is this: do you believe you are worth the investment? Do you genuinely believe, not as a nice thought but as a lived truth, that building yourself is worth the effort? Because for many people the real barrier to building habits is not laziness. It is a quiet but powerful belief that it will not matter. That they will fail again. That they have tried before and it has not worked. That they are somehow exempt from the possibility of becoming different. That transformation is for other people, and they are stuck with the version of themselves they have always been. That belief is the real prison. Not your circumstances. Not your past failures. Not your environment. The belief that you cannot become different. And it is a lie. It is a story built from incomplete evidence. Because every time you tried and stopped, you took it as proof that you cannot sustain change. But what it actually proved is that you had not yet found the right way to build change into your daily life. You had been attempting transformation through willpower alone rather than through the patient, gentle, consistent construction of habit. And willpower is not a reliable foundation. It depletes. It wavers. It depends on mood and energy and circumstance. But habit, once properly formed, becomes automatic. It stops requiring willpower because it stops feeling like a choice. It becomes part of who you are. And that is the entire point. There is a version of you that already knows this. A version that woke up this morning and felt the pull towards something better. A version that is tired, not from hard work, but from the weight of postponed potential. That version of you has been patient. Has waited through years of almost and maybe and someday. And now it is asking something simple. Not for a revolution. Not for a perfect plan. Just for one habit. One commitment. One small daily action that you will protect with the same seriousness that you protect the things that matter most to you. Because you matter most. Not your productivity. Not your output. Not your achievements. You. The person you are becoming. The person your daily habits are either building or eroding. There is something I want to leave with you that I believe with everything I understand about human nature and the way lives are built and transformed. The great regrets of life are not usually about the dramatic failures. They are about the quiet abdications. The mornings you did not get up when you said you would. The work you did not do when you had the time. The presence you withheld from people who needed it. The habits you almost built but abandoned just before they became part of you. Those quiet abdications accumulate over years into a weight that becomes very hard to carry. Not because any single one of them was catastrophic, but because together they communicate something to your deepest self. They say, you are not someone who follows through. And that self-perception, once rooted, reshapes everything. But here's what I also know. That self-perception can be rewritten. Not through one grand gesture. Not through a speech you give yourself in the mirror. Through the same mechanism that built it in the first place. Repeated behavior. The same way the pattern of not following through was built through 1,000 small abdications, the pattern of following through is built through 1,000 small commitments kept. You are always, always writing the story of who you are. The question is only whether you are writing it consciously or unconsciously. Whether you are the author or the drifter. And you have the capacity to be the author. You have always had that capacity. Every human being does. It requires not talent, not extraordinary discipline, not perfect circumstances. It requires only the willingness to take one small daily action seriously. To protect one habit with the same ferocity you would protect the people you love most. To say, this is who I am becoming, and I will prove it to myself not with words but with what I do when no one else is watching. There is a version of you that has been waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right feeling, the right conditions. That version has been patient, but patience without movement is just a different name for staying still. And there is a version of you that decides today. Not tomorrow. Not Monday. Not after the next thing resolves itself or the next season arrives. Today. That version does not wait to feel ready. That version understands that readiness is built through action, not before it. That version starts small, stays consistent, and trusts that the compound effect of daily habit will do what no single burst of inspiration ever could. One of these versions builds a life they recognize as their own. A life that reflects who they truly are, what they truly value, and what they were quietly capable of all along. The other waits. Both are you. The question that only you can answer is which one gets to live the rest of your life. The habits you build today are the life you will live tomorrow. Not eventually. Not if everything goes perfectly. Tomorrow. Because what you do today is what you become. And what you become is what your life is. It has always been this simple. And it has always been this available. Build the habits. Become the person. Live the life. Not someday. Now.